All right, hello everybody, and welcome to Geopolitical Trends, where truth matters. Very excited to be with you on this weekend here on June 1st now. We are already in the month of June, where time goes. Well, I am very excited because you all know who's here, right? A man who does not need an introduction. So anyway, let me first of all say hi to all of you here on the channel. Matt Becky, good to see you as always. Peng Yu, Jesus Aguilar, Deji, Moshi, good to see you. And Truth Seeker, Noel from Singapore, good to see you here. Willie Holman, as always. Now, this person here, I don't believe we've met before. Chik Wong Kanam. That's an interesting question you have there. The question is, can the world trust China, ruled by dictator and corrupt CCP? Wow. Well, you must have to learn a lot about China before you put a statement like this. So I don't mind you being here, but at the same time, if you have anything to contribute to the conversation, you're welcome. Otherwise, I'll ask you to take a hike, okay? Because I don't tolerate this nonsense stuff. So, all right, Maggie N, good to see you. Marduk 369, good to see you as always. Rocio Delgado. All right, guys, I am gonna have to go now. Bring in my guest here because we got a lot to cover. Hi, Carl.
Hi, David. How are you?
Good to see you, man. It's so nice. Carl, so many in the community been asking me, when are you bringing Carl? I said, I will. Give it a time, guy. I will, and I will reach out to Carl. He is busy. He has things to do and all that, and he will be here. So here he is now. So I look forward to our conversation here, and it's always fascinating with you because you cover so many aspects that a lot of people in the Western world have no idea about. So here is what we're going to be covering, just to give you guys an idea what I will be talking to Carl about. We're going to be talking about 4 topics, believe it or not. We'll talk about the China meeting with Japan and South Korea. We'll talk about the China-Arab Summit. We'll talk about the China military drills that just concluded last week. And the last thing, of course, the China sanctioning U.S. And I'd like to have Carl's input and feedback about this. So, Carl, how would you categorize this meeting that just took place between China, Japan, and South Korea? I mean, I had a chance to read the translated version of President Xi's statement, and I would like to share it with you all before I'll turn it over to you, Carl. He said, and I quote, as change, I'm sorry, this is for the second one. Let me hold on that. Let's move on with the China meeting with Japan and South Korea. How do you categorize it? Can China trust Japan and South Korea?
It's not about matter of trust, David. China never put all its eggs in one basket. China always tries a multi-pronged approach. So at this particular juncture, United States is trying to form a trilateral military alliance with US, Japan, and South Korea to contain China. So what China is trying to do is to counter the US diplomatic efforts. And this is by inviting South Korea and Japan to a meeting. This is China to reassure its neighbors, but also to remind them that for the region to prosper, peace and stability is a key, and not military confrontation, not what United States is trying to do. And both South Korea and Japan still heavily depend on the Chinese market. China is the world's it's one of the world's largest consumer market. Both Japanese and Korean companies, they are heavily invested inside China, and they also sell to China. So it's time to remind leaders from both nations that it's better to continue this mutually beneficial trading relationship rather than making some saber rattling noises with United States. And also, if a conflict is going to break out, it's going to break out first in East Asia, and that's going to impact not just China but all its neighboring countries, including South Korea and Japan. So it's actually in the interest of all 3 countries that peace is preserved. And this is when conducting diplomacy, you have to state firm your position, and then you try to persuade others to see light from your perspective. And I think, what China has on its side is this large market. It's a pursuit of trade relationship, no matter what. And these are very persuasive argument for many countries in the world. And so South Korea and Japan, they have to balance their traditional military relationship with United States and a trade relationship with China. China is doing what it can to put more weight on its side of the balance. This is what China is trying to do.
Well, this is almost it's reflective of what the Premier Li Qiang said in the meeting when he said, and I quote, "We are here, the meeting, both as a restart and a new beginning." And he called for the comprehensive resumption of cooperation between East Asian economic powerhouse. But the question, Carl, remains: can they be trusted, Japan and South Korea? And the reason I'm saying this, Carl, I fall back to this issue of trust because I saw what took place with Philippines. When Philippines took over, Marcos Jr., and all of a sudden flipped.
I think Philippines is a little bit different case from South Korea and Japan, even though all three states are essentially client states of the United States. U.S. have a long colonial relationship with all three countries. But in Philippines, particular, Philippines was a straight-out U.S. colony since the Spanish-American War until end of World War II. But Japan and South Korea, even though they're militarily occupied, with tens of thousands of U.S. troops on their soil, and basically acting as vassals of United States in East Asia, but occasionally the South Korean and Japanese leadership, they do try to do the best for their own national interest, which I don't know if I can say the same for Bongbong Marcos. Philippines had a phase when Duterte tried to assert Filipino independence, but now looks like the pendulum has swung to the other side. But we know Japanese leaders that could not say no to the United States, because whoever wants to challenge the current Japan-U.S. security alliance, they get removed immediately. I mean, the Japanese prime minister come and go, but if they say no to U.S., they can never stay long in office. But on the other side, they do have a very, very much vested interest in maintaining the peace in East Asia, because even more so than Philippines, South Korea and Japan has a much stronger trade relationship with China. Both Japanese and South Korean companies are heavily invested in China, both to produce export back to their own country and also to export globally, but also to sell it to the Chinese consumer market, which is one of the largest market in the world. So they, whereas the Philippines, their export to China are mostly commodities like farm produce, like bananas, pineapples, etc. But Japan, the Japanese car makers are still very entrenched in China. China is the world's largest market for automobiles. It's larger than the Chinese market for cars is way bigger than even the car market in the United States. So the Japanese companies are not, Toyota is not going to give up on the Chinese market. And so there are other Japanese and South Korean business interests that also want to maintain a healthy relationship with China. So this is a little bit different than the Philippines, because the Philippines, they don't have the same kind of the economic structure as South Korea and Japan. And so there's less economic incentive, especially for Bongbong Marcos, when he has hundreds of billions of dollars of his dad's money that's
back home.
U.S. government. It's a much more persuasive argument for him. Whereas Japan and South Korea, it's the opposite. They have hundreds of billions of dollars invested in China. they wanted they don't want to see that investment evaporate. So this is why I speak of a balance. They have to balance between their traditional client relationship with United States, but they also balance their trade relationship with China. And China is just like occasionally reminding them, like, look, we're here for peace. Peace is good for all of us in East Asia, because if US is going to fight a conflict with China, it mostly likely to start in East Asia. It will be devastating for all the East Asian economies, whether South Korea, Japan, or China. And however that may escalate, but you will definitely start in the East Asian neighborhoods, and that's not in the interest of any of the East Asian country involved. So this is again China sending its occasional reminder and also affirming its commitment to continue the trade relationship with South Korea and Japan.
Yeah. In your opinion, Carl, why do you think President Xi didn't go and sent just the premier to go, Li Qiang? In your opinion, is there any reason for that?
Maybe. I mean, this is hard to. This is kind of because I can't. I don't have a direct neural link to Xi Jinping, so I don't really know how the decision-making process is hammered out in Beijing. But maybe this is it doesn't need. Maybe Xi Jinping feels he doesn't. It's not, because also currently there is tensions between South Korea, Japan, and China because of their military alliance with the United States. So this is, maybe Xi Jinping is reserving himself for more close allies like Putin, or the other leaders that in the global South that China is wooing.
Well, I read up some analysis about even prior to the meeting as to what might transpire. One thing that caught my attention was the demonstrations. I'm going to share a picture here. Those are the demonstrations against the Prime Minister of Japan, Fumio Kishida. And I was very, very taken by that. I admit, I didn't expect it. So I was very, very surprised. I wonder what was the whole reason behind. They didn't disclose that in the article, by the way. Which, by the way, guys, I will put the link for you for all this, including President Xi's speech later on when he met with the Arab world. So, all right, let's move on to our second topic here about the China-Arab Summit, which just took place recently. So, as I said, as I mentioned earlier, I had a chance to read the translated version of the presidential speech, and I was very taken by the key words they were used, and I'd like to share it with you if you allow me here. President Xi said, and I quote, "As changes unseen in a century unfold rapidly across the world, both China and Arab states strive to accomplish their historical mission of national rejuvenation and a faster national development. Building a China-Arab community with a shared future is a strong statement for our common desire for a new era of China-Arab relations and a better future for the world." End of quote. What do you make out of the whole, not only just the summit, but the optics of it, that here are Arab leaders from the Gulf states not going to the US, but going to China?
Well, many people may not realize that the Chinese-Arab relationship goes way back. It didn't start in the modern times. It actually took place, at least to the 7th century. And there's what Xi Jinping is trying to do, bring the Belt and Road Initiative, is actually a revival of the ancient Silk Road links. And this ancient Silk Road linked China and the Arab world for centuries before the Europeans arrived in the Indian Ocean and South China Sea. And right now, China is refocusing its diplomatic effort, to the global South, because US is trying to wall itself off and as well as its allies in Europe and also Japan, South Korea, from China. And the Chinese trade relationship is growing. Right now, the Chinese export to the global South have overtaken its trade with United States and EU, and also China has a reliance on imported oil. And this is another additional dimension of the China relationship with the Gulf countries, for example. But beyond the Gulf countries, China has a long-standing relationship with Egypt, for example. Dating back to Nasser. And when the leader Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai met with Nasser in Indonesia in the 1955 Bandung Conference during the first Afro-Asiatic conference, aka Bandung Conference. So there's a long history of cooperation between China and the Arab world. But in this particular juncture, when Israel is committing atrocity in Gaza, China is taking a stand. It is showing its commitment to stand with the Arab world against the Israeli action, which is backed by the United States. And this is another geopolitical tectonic shift that's taking place. U.S. is sticking by Israel no matter what, whereas China and Russia, they are showing solidarity with the Palestinian cause, and they're also deepening their engagement with the Arab world. And right now, Saudi Arabia, United States today actually is a top oil producer of the world. The amount of the oil United States produce per year is, people wouldn't believe it, but it's more than Saudi Arabia and Russia combined. So what that means, United States is less reliant on foreign import. They're less reliant on importing from the Gulf countries, for example. Whereas China is now the top destination for oil and gas in the Persian Gulf, and so that means China is Saudi Arabia's top export market, as well as Iran, Qatar, Bahrain, you name it, and which makes even more sense for the two sides to work together. And we're now in the age of de-dollarization, when United States is throwing its financial weight around, sanction anybody who uses US dollars, throwing Russia off the SWIFT system. And this is putting people on notice, like, wait a minute, if United States can freeze Russian asset held in the Western banks and then appropriating it, now they're talking about using it to spend on Ukraine, right? I mean, they're literally stealing a sovereign country's money. This can happen to anybody who offends people in Washington. This could happen to them. So there's a huge incentive right now to move off the dollar. And one of the bases for the dollar is the petrodollar system. When in the 1970s, Kissinger went to Saudi Arabia, work out a deal where they will price the oil in dollars. So that means anybody who wants to import oil, they need US dollars. And this is how the petrodollar comes into being. But today, the basis of petrodollar itself is being undermined, because now China is the largest consumer of oil, and there's no reason China shouldn't purchase oil in yuan, because yuan is valuable now, because China is a factory of the world. They can actually use the yuan and go purchase goods from China. Before it was United States that was taking oil from the Arab world and then exporting manufacturing goods. Now that same dynamic is playing out between China and the Arab world. China is exporting the manufactured goods, and they're purchasing oil, and it makes less and less sense to conduct that trade in US dollars in today's environment. So we're probably going to see a shift, a move off the petrodollar, I think, in foreseeable future, and China and the Arab world is paving the way for that future right now.
Yeah, I won't be surprised, Carl. As a matter of fact, I've had some talks with the some people in the region, Middle East, that is, or West Asia, those that they are very familiar with those kind of dynamics. And then most of the conversation converges on the idea that it would be just a matter of time. And that is going to be what everybody's watching for right now, based on the conversation that I had, is that they're watching for the signs from China, believe it or not from the Arab world, from China regarding the trade. If and when China will say, sure, we'll do trade with you, this is the US, but we're not going to accept the dollar, we'll accept a different currency. Now, to me, that will be the nail on the coffin. China is not willing to do this now, based on what I gathered from the conversation, because strategically it doesn't make any sense. So, and I can see why. So, I want to go back to the historical aspect between the link between China and the Arab world. A lot of us in the West do not understand that this goes way back. Some historical record that I looked at, including the Tang dynasty and whomever comes after it, they had something called tolerance for religion, including Taoism, Buddhism, and guess what? Islam. That was part of that. So I need to ask your input, and this also based on the comments from some of the viewers or supporters of the channel. For example, I got one here. I'm going to share it with you all. Kei Yang Lo wrote, and I quote, "Hello, Dr. O. My understanding is the dynasty succeeding the Tang was not the, is it, do I pronounce it correctly? Sui is S-U-I, Sui dynasty. The Sui dynasty was a short-lived dynasty that reunified China after the Han dynasty collapsed into the three kingdoms. Post-Tang dynasty was a period of disunification known as the Five Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms. After this, China was eventually somewhat reunified by the Song dynasty. I also have to bear in mind that the transitions between these dynasties and periods overlap." End of quote. What are we looking at here, Carl?
So Islam actually arrived in China very early in the 7th century. Very soon after Prophet Muhammad started preaching, and this is it arrived via South China Sea from the trade, because China and the Arab world has long been linked by the maritime Silk Road. That's the ships traveling the Indian Ocean through the Straits of Malacca up the South China Sea. They will land in the port of Canton, or today's Guangzhou, and that's where the first mosque was being built in the 7th century, and a Muslim community start to spring up along the southeastern China seaboard when the Arab and Persian merchants, they will arrive via the maritime Silk Road, and they will have settled down in Chinese cities, because at the time the trade is conducted by monsoon patterns, because the Indian Ocean monsoon, they switch directions for 6 months and then switch their directions back. So the traders, it will take them, when the monsoons goes from east to west, from west to east, they will depart the Arabian Peninsula, depart Persian Gulf. They will travel down the Indian Ocean to the Straits of Malacca, through the Strait of Malacca. They will settle there for a time, and they wait for the monsoon to change direction, and they sail up to South China Sea, and they do their business, but they have to stay there for 6 months for the monsoon to change, for the wind to change. So during the 6 months they're settling, doing business, a lot of them start to have local families. And they have local wives, and they start new communities. This is how the Islam spread in Southeast Asia, and as well as in southern China, is spread by trade. And the Indian Ocean basin trade has history of thousands of years before the so-called Age of Discovery, before the Portuguese break into Indian Ocean. When the Europeans came, is essentially they did not discover anything new. They took over. They took over existing trade network that was linking China Africa, Arabia, and India. And so now what China is trying to do is trying to bring back this ancient linkages, and so just like it's a time when the global South, and particularly the BRICS countries, now they have a higher GDP than the G7, right? And that trend is only continuing, and China is just deepening its engagement with China's deepening engagement with Arab world is part of its strategy to engage further with the global South, but also reviving this ancient trade relationship.
Well, especially when we take into consideration what China's been announcing as far as the recognition of the state of Palestine. The U.S. won't be able to do something like that, and the U.S. will not do something like that because, straightforward, we have never played an honest broker into that conflict. So China seems to me it's at the right time, at the right place, strategically speaking and geopolitically speaking, that is sort of filling up this void that is now existed or has existed by the United States. So very, very interesting. The idea of also, I wanted to ask you about, since you are a history buff guy, you know more about history here. The Japan and China. I'm going to go back here and base again on one of the comments by one of my followers here, Food Paradise 5792. He said, and I quote, "Modern day katana, which is the Japanese sword, was actually an imitation of a weapon called the Tang knife or Tang blade, and add curves to it in Chinese. Now the sword is double-edged, single-edged sword, actually called big knife. But of course, Japanese perfected the sword making metallurgy. The Japanese steel is one of the best in the world today." So, is there a truth to this fact, historically speaking?
So, just like China and the Arab world has a long-standing historical relationship, China and Japan relationship dates even longer. And during Tang Dynasty, that's when Japan initiated an extensive cultural borrowing from China. So this is where Japan got Buddhism. It got its writing. Because before they imported the Chinese characters, Chinese writing system wholesale, and they imported technologies like architecture. The ancient Japanese capital in Kyoto, it was actually a miniature version of the ancient Chinese capital of Chang'an, the Tang Dynasty capital. And if you go to Kyoto, a lot of temples, they still have like statues that were built in the Tang Dynasty style. And the one technology they received is what they're talking about, the Tang sword. But the Tang sword is a straight edge weapon. So Japanese did what they do best, which is they take technology from another culture and they improvise it and then made it better. And they made the blade into a carved edge weapon. That's the origin of katana. So there's a little bit truth. Yes, they originally received the metallurgy from China. But they improved it, and that's how katana came about. I mean, Japan before its turn toward West, it had extensive cultural borrowing from China. I mean, the Chinese, the Japanese writing system, they borrow Confucianism. They did not receive Buddhism directly from India. They received Buddhism from China, from the Tang Dynasty. So Japan kind of looked toward China as a source of their culture and civilization until the modern times, until the Meiji Restoration. You know, one of the slogan in the Meiji Restoration in the 1860s was actually "leaving Asia and join Europe," because they saw the, after industrial revolution, Europe is leapfrogging ahead. So they wanted to adopt a wholesale westernization program in Japan. And but still, even with the wholesale westernization program in the modern time, Japan still retained a lot of the Chinese cultural elements that they had borrowed in the time past. You can see that in their architecture, in their writing, a lot, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so funny. When I read I did history courses, of course, back then, and one of the things we were talking about, the samurai, just brief history. It was never mentioned of something like this, because it was always presented to us as the idea that the sword, the samurai, whatever, was a Japanese creation. I never knew, Carl, the link between the sword in Japan that traces its root back to China. We were never exposed to this.
This is why China continues its engagement with South Korea and Japan. It's because Japan, what they do best is they can all, whenever they see which way the wind is blowing, they always side with the strongest. When China was strong, Japan, did a lot of cultural borrowing from China. When the West became ascendant, Japan suddenly, start to emulate the West, so that, the wind might shift again. I mean, I think the wind is shifting already. And currently, United States is still the global hegemon. So Japan sides with U.S. But when when the U.S. status, a global hegemon, gets challenged, when it gets dislodged from its top number one spot, I can conceivably see Japan revert back to its traditional role, and to continue its relationship with China. So China is playing the long game, right? I mean, like a lot of Americans are not even aware of all these historical relationship in East Asia, right? They can't even find this country on a map anyway. But China is a very deeply historically conscious country. They remember their past, and they understand how this game is played. Countries like South Korea and Japan, they will side with the strongest power in the region. Right now, United States is still on paper in terms of military power, the strongest power in East Asia. So for now, Japan and South Korea may be vassals to the United States. But that time may change. That time may change. China is building up foundations right now for that shift, for the future shift.
Very interesting. And given our short history, 200 plus years ain't enough in comparison to those old civilizations. So it will be interesting to see how this develop, and what will the U.S. do. Even though I am looking over the horizon, Carl, and I just don't see good stuff lying as to what the U.S. / collective West is going to do in the Far East. So let's hope things will go a different direction for that one. So I want us to shift to recent China's military drills. And I'm going to share one statement here by the head of the Pacific Command, who said, and I quote, "China's military exercises last week looks like a rehearsal for a Taiwan invasion," end of quote. This is, of course, which when I read it, I had the same reaction, Carl. I was just laughing at the stupidity that the top high-ranking officers in the Pentagon, they just lack the depth in understanding what this is all about. What do you make out of that?
Well, they also have an incentive to lie, to exaggerate, to resort to hyperbolic devices in order to drive up the Pentagon budget to more than $1 trillion. And the thing is, for a military operation like for China's People's Liberation Army to cross over Taiwan Strait to take over, this is a huge undertaking. It will take months of preparation. I mean, it will make the landing in Normandy like a cakewalk, and in today's environment. So if China were to do a trial run, you will be able to see the true mobilization on the coast opposite of Taiwan Strait, like 6 months in advance. So that's how far, how long they will need to gather the troop, gather the materials, the logistics. In today the world, you can observe it by satellites. What China is doing is this is what United States term quote unquote gray zone aggression, because China is not initially a conflict. China is actually not firing a shot. What China is doing is asserting its sovereignty rights to Taiwan, because China says Taiwan is part of China. So we will assert our sovereignty rights by patrolling around it. Now China didn't used to do this, but this is how China responded to a series of provocations. Started with United States weapon sale to Taiwan, Nancy Pelosi flying to Taiwan. So every time after such event, China will up the ante. So immediately after Pelosi visited Taiwan, China didn't shoot Pelosi down. They let Pelosi land and leave. But right after Pelosi left, that's when China announced, okay, we're going to do military draw around Taiwan right now. And guess what? There's nothing United States could do. And again, this time it was more a response to the inauguration speech of the new incoming Taiwan leader. Because the new Taiwan leader, Li Qiang, he is compared to his predecessor, Tsai Ing-wen was a political opportunist. She just says whatever to get votes, continue the grift. But Li Qiang, many people believe he's a true believer of his party platform, which is actually Taiwan independence. In his inaugural speech, he actually said, United States will come to our aid, right? His predecessor never even said that. His predecessor was very, very smart about it. Tsai Ing-wen just say, "Oh, the world loves Taiwan. The United States love Taiwan. Europe love Taiwan. Japan love Taiwan." But what does that love actually mean? She never specified. But Li Qiang actually explicitly said, "Oh, United States will come to our aid," and this is another sign of him being a true believer. His belief is that if he push for Taiwan independence, for example, United States will pay in both blood and treasure, right? But that's not how United States functions. If you look at Ukraine, this is how United States like to fight proxy wars. It doesn't like to engage directly against a peer competitor, especially a nuclear armed power. What United States like to do is engage in proxy wars, like in Ukraine. They want to bleed Russian to the last Ukrainians. So this is why you see a lot of the English language media right now talking about why Taiwan is not spending enough on their defense, why Taiwan is not preparing its military to fight China, right? Because they want to put the burden on Taiwan.
On the Taiwanese.
This is why the opposition parties in Taiwan, they say they talk about Taiwan and United States relationship as between that of a dog and its owner. So like a regular relationship between dog and the owner. The owner provides the food for the dog, but right now if Taiwan is to be a watchdog for United States in East Asia, U.S. is expecting Taiwan, the dog, to pay for its own food, because now Taiwan is one of the best customers of U.S. defense industry. The $8 billion that was authorized for Taiwan. I look at the details of the Congress bill for sending $8 billion, quote unquote aid to Taiwan. It was not aid. It was not. They're not giving money to Taiwan. So out of the $8 billion, about $2 billion was just authorizing release of weapons that Taiwan has already paid for, but United States have not delivered yet. and a lot of the holdup is
Wow.
actually because the U.S. defense industry is stretched right now. They can't
Yeah.
they can't complete. They have a lot of backlog orders, and this is another problem U.S. empire is facing is the deindustrialization for the last 30 years have went on so far. Now like the whole purpose of military industrial complex is feeding money, right? But right now they're taking the money, but they're not producing, they're not delivering. So Taiwan has paid $2 billion for those U.S. weapons already, but they have not been delivered to Taiwan. And so because unlike Ukraine, Taiwan is a very rich country. They can afford to pay for their weapon. They don't need U.S. Congress to give them money to buy weapons. They have, and they do. A lot, and another portion of the $8 billion is not even given to Taiwan. It's given to Pentagon to
Mm.
do what is necessary for them to ensure defense of Taiwan. So it's actually spending on U.S. military. It's all the money eventually cycle back to the U.S. military industrial complex. None of that $8 billion is
It's going
really
to,
given to Taiwan. And so this is a role that United States expect Taiwan to play. It's supposed to be this milk cow that continue to provide for money for the defense industry like Raytheon, Boeing,
yeah.
Lockheed Martin, etc. This is why China is placing sanction on the U.S. defense industry
That's true.
because they understand how the game is played. You gotta go hit them where it hurts.
Yeah.
These companies have been profiting for decades, selling all kind of expensive but ultimately outdated and useless weapon platform to Taiwan. Taiwan is buying like Abrams tanks. Like what do you need? Why do you need an Abrams tanks on an island? By the time you need to use those tanks, it's too late. It's too late. And so there, this is there's of course there are people in Pentagon, they're saying the same thing, but what they're
Yeah.
saying they want Taiwan to spend more to buy different weapon platform. Probably buying preferably from those lobbyist sponsors, right? And this is all a game for grift. But China understand how the game is played, so they're like, okay, we understand the issue. The Taiwan issue is really an issue between United States and China, and so we're gonna hit the biggest sponsor of the Taiwan Strait tension, which is the Chinese military industrial complex.
Wow, very, very interesting. Well, what's also confusing to me was how delusional the guy in Taiwan. I call him the governor because I don't believe in because Taiwan is not a sovereign state. How can you call somebody a president when that entity is not a sovereign? So that's the way I always refer to him as a governor. So to me, it was delusional when he's saying that the U.S. is going to come to the aid. You will think he will learn from what's going on in Ukraine. That I ain't going to help Ukraine, or I ain't going to help Taiwan, I ain't going to help the Philippines or Australia or New Zealand for that matter. Let alone, we don't want to get into a confrontation with China. Straightforward. Logistically, it won't make any sense for us. We will be at a disadvantage because the proximity where China is versus for us, by the time we move all the ships through the Indian Ocean, they will be dealt with right there before they get close by. And to me, it was like, what is he, on drugs or what? What was he smoking that day of the inauguration for him to be stating something like this? And this reminds me, by the way, Carl, of your conversation that you had a few weeks ago in a panel when you mentioned about the U.S. as being a child, like a child. I think Scott didn't understand what you were referring to. I really get it because I was listening and I see your point. Yeah, most of the West here, they won't get it. They won't get that one. That's why I was like, very interesting, and I could see why Scott didn't get that one.
Scott Ritter, he's very good at understanding the U.S. mentality, which is craze. It's like craze on hegemony, right? Scott Ritter understands that mentality
Yeah.
very well, which I also understand. But this is what we call being a children throwing tantrum in the rest of the
Yeah.
world. It's like a baby holding a very powerful weapon. Like everybody's scared of the baby. He's like, okay, we have to handle him with the kid glove, but it doesn't mean that person is not a baby. He's still a baby,
Yeah.
and it's not being responsible, right? And that's the thing. So yeah, I mean, like I understand what Scott Ritter is saying. Like he's
Yeah.
totally right on how crazy the U.S. politicians are. How crazy they would go, how far they would go to defend the U.S. hegemony. I understand that. We get that, but that is not adult behavior. That's a
No.
very childish behavior,
Yeah.
and this is why people understand how U.S. functions, how U.S. works,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
people have their own plans for the future, and they're moving on without United States right now.
Yeah. And we are about to pay the price, especially after what Biden said by authorizing now weapons to be used against inside Russia. You'll think about how childish and crazy our politicians are. So I truly understood your point when you mentioned about American government in this case being like a child, because child doesn't care. He doesn't know. So and it just crossed my mind while I was talking, while we were talking about this particular topic. This leads me now to talk about our last point here before I turn it over to the some questions here. The sanctioning of the U.S. defense contractor, 12 of them. Now, if I am to look at this, Carl, if I am to look at it from, let's say, an outsider, let's say I'm not an American, I'm just an independent from some neutral country, even though there is no such thing. Even Switzerland is not a neutral anymore. If I'm to look at it, I'm going to say to myself, well, China's being conservative. It's not being very aggressive into the sanctions, even though is doing tit for tat, which is the right move per se. But is China going far enough with the aggression, with the sanctions rather, to make a dent?
Well, what China is doing is sending a message, sending a signal. China is not interested into a full-out economic war with United States, unlike some U.S. politicians, because China. Look at what China actually did. They invite all the top U.S. executives to visit China. They invited Tim Cook, Bill
Yeah.
Gates, and Elon Musk. China hosted, all the even all the Wall Street types, from J.P. Morgan and stuff. So China says, okay, we're open for business. We're not targeting U.S. firms operating, investing in China, because we understand they bring value and they add on to the Chinese economy. And U.S. defense industry, on the other hand, they add nothing to the Chinese economy, right? So this is very targeted, very specific targeted sanction. And again, I mean, it might not be very substantial, but China is sending a message. But what I'm interested if there's going to be follow up, because United States defense industry, they still require a lot of components and a lot of it's rare earth, right? I mean, China controls like 90% of the rare earth production. So what I would like to see is China banning the export of rare earth to the U.S. defense industries. Not a blanket ban to United States, but ban. I mean, which means they will probably get it from third party, but still, that would make a statement. Say, like, look, you're not going to use our rare earth in your missiles, in your guidance systems, in your weapons. This is, I have to look into the specifics of the China sanctions to see if that's covered. That's what I like to see, like, because this is an area where China do control most of the production, and they could, whereas there's actual dependency by the United States defense industry on these Chinese imports. And so I like to see how that plays out. But China is not interested in a trade war with U.S. China very much would like to have a revert back to a normal trade relationship with United States. China loves to do business. I mean, there's still is right now it's United States that's putting up all the trade barriers. With Biden slapping like 200% tariffs and on Chinese goods and Chinese EVs and stuff. This is because United States is realizing they are losing competitive. They cannot compete head and toe with the Chinese manufacturing prowess. So this is why they're building up trade barriers. Before, when U.S. companies could just walk over local competition, that's during Bill Clinton era, that's when they're promoting free trade all over the world. It's like free trade, because they know big U.S. multinational will just walk in and buy up everything. But now they're facing competition. Now they're putting up barrier. I mean, so we'll have to see how that plays out. But I think China is still holding up. Is still dangling the allure its own market toward the U.S. business community. Like, look, we are still here for you if you want to do business. If you could just rein in your crazy politicians for a second, we can continue this trade relationship. But the problem is there's a big shift in balance in the United States. There used to be a pro-engagement camp and a pro-containment camp. The pro-containment camp was dominated by Pentagon. Pro-engagement camp was dominated by U.S. business. But lately, the pro-engagement camp got eviscerated. The pro-containment camp dominated by Pentagon, now dictating all level of U.S. policy. And one part of it is also because the U.S. business now has been divided, with some business facing stiff competition from China. So they actually want to contain China. I'm talking about Facebook. I'm talking about Google, because they're facing tough competition from TikTok. So they want to ban TikTok. For them, because they have limited exposure to the Chinese market. Whereas they're more embedded with the U.S. industrial military intelligence complex, they have more incentive to jump on the pro-containment bandwagon, because Google and Facebook, they also sell all kind of surveillance software to United States, and they have all the defense contract with Pentagon, etc. We'll have to wait and see how that dynamic plays out internally. I mean, we're having an election coming up, right? I mean, let's see. I think Biden is a preferred candidate for the U.S. establishment. He's an establishment candidate because he at least talk about building alliances. But whereas Trump is all about we can do this alone, and a lot of the NATO people, they don't like Trump because they feel Trump is unpredictable. He will throw. But at this current rate, I don't think Biden is going to win, and we could very possibly looking at a Trump presidency. Now Trump is a guy who initiated like kind of the sharp downturn in the U.S.-China relationship, but on the other hand, Biden made it worse. So it's not like Biden and Trump, one is better for U.S.-China relationship, but Trump is a businessman. That means he sees everything as transactional based. It's possible to negotiate with a businessman rather than like a zombie, a propped up zombie like Biden, because we know Biden is actually not pulling the string. It's the establishment backers who are really the U.S. deep state.
Yeah. Well, that's why they want him to win, because he doesn't know what's going on anyway. So I'm assuming that's the reason why. But for us in the U.S., we don't have any leaders whatsoever. Both parties, I've always said this, both parties are two faces of the same coin. Doesn't matter. I mean, Trump himself now is threatening the Europeans with tariffs. Yeah, he's already stated that. He's even trying to deport Whoever support Palestinians are right here in the state. That's how crazy. That's how crazy Trump is. And the whole system in America, where what has become of it, which
Yeah.
usually it's not a good sign. For a declining country, usually those are the signs that indicates the decline is inevitable. The question is how it's going to go out. And that is where, personally, for me, where my concern is. And I do see over the horizon, it's the Far East, where the next tension, once the dust settles on this Ukraine issue, because Ukraine is over. This summit that they're calling for in Switzerland, which, by the way, guys, I will be talking about that on Monday. It's nothing but a facade. It's nothing but a farce. No more, no
They
less.
didn't invite Russia. They did not even invite Russia.
The main party to the problem, to the conflict, is not invited. How do you call this a peaceful summit? We all know. I mean, China now made it clear as to why it refused. Of course, they were asking the Chinese for some other stuff. I had to find out exactly why the Chinese turned it down. And rightly so, because China wanted to be on the right side of history. How can you invite us to attend the summit when you are not inviting the parties that's supposed to be in the summit, the Russia, that is? So it makes perfect sense. I could see where this is going. But to go back to your point about when you say about the competition and so forth, regarding the Facebook and Google, which you were right, it's because we saw the same thing with Huawei. When Huawei developed the phone, I remember I was still in DC at that time. And the word was like, oh, why are you going to allow Huawei phone to be here on the market? And I remember having a conversation with someone, and I say, why not? I mean, the phone is only $128 versus $500 from Apple. Where I said, Mr. O, this is the reason why I think the government is going to step in now and ban it and say it has to do with spying. And I was like, just shaking my head. It's because it was about the share of the market. And most Americans had no clue. They bought to the arguments that it was the Huawei phones will spy on you, whatever. It's like iPhone doesn't do it. Or the NSA.
Yeah, the U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, she said she was upset when Huawei came out with a new flagship phone. Yeah. Like, why would you care? Why would you? You are the freaking U.S. Commerce Secretary. Why would you care if Huawei makes a commercial phone? I mean, like, she made it her stake her whole career on stopping Huawei to produce a consumer phone. It's crazy.
Yeah, because they don't want the deal was between Apple and the government. Because to us is not a secret because we've been inside. We understand how the system works. All those companies for you guys. If you're an American watching this, they shouldn't shock you. Apple, Google, all those are the back door for the U.S. government. Straightforward. There is no ifs and buts. They're watching you. They're listening to you. It's just the norm. So for them to be making that argument about Huawei stuff, but sometimes this is where you realize we are losing the edge to the competitiveness. We did this to Huawei. They went ahead and developed their own chips. Now China is saying, why will we ever care about getting chips from the West? We can build our own. And that's what we are not realizing here, what it's going to do to us. Most Americans have no clue what lies ahead. And that's, to me, was the idea of these sanctions. It was almost a sign for me that China is in a point right now where it says, you know what? Enough of this nice talk. It's a strategic move, of course. They're going to be very, very smart about it. But at the same time, it's, to me, sending that message on the global stage as time has come for us to look at you in the eye and said, even you will be sanctioned. That's how I read it. So, all right, let me take a few questions from some of you guys for Carl. First of all, I want to say thank you to Lester Banana. Thank you so much for buying me instant coffee, even though it's nighttime for me. But thank you. I'll have it tomorrow. Much appreciated. Let me see who else. Oh, Jane Wang. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Evening time from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Thank you so much for being here and for supporting the channel. All right. Let me take one. I saw one question here from Hong Wang. Let me get to it because it's a lot. I don't know how many we have, over a few thousand or so live watchers here, Carl. We had a very interesting conversation yesterday with Dr. Yan Liang. She's an economist. There was very, very interesting conversation. So I look forward to having more conversation. We need to do a panel conversation, Carl. Who do you suggest I invite?
Are you asking me?
Yes, I am asking you because I trust you.
I don't know. Well, maybe we can do another debate with Scott Ritter on your show. No, I'm just kidding. Whoever. I love to talk. You know me, David.
Yeah, no, I would not reach out to Scott anymore because I did a few times and never heard back. To me, it's like an insult. You know what I mean? I reached out to Professor Q Jin. You know who she is? She's in London School of Economics.
Yeah. She's great.
Great. She is. Guess what, Carl? I sent an email within 24 hours. Her publicist, Paul, sent me an email right back. They said, sorry, Dr. O, she just cannot make it this time around. That doesn't mean she won't. And to me, it was like, that's just a courtesy. I've been sending email and text to Scott, never heard back, and I'm done. That's it, Scott, because I don't chase after people. To me, it's an insult. So anyway, here's a question from Hong Wang, one of the avid supporter for the channel. Thank you very much for the super sticker, by the way. This is a question for you, Carl. I heard that Taiwan sent American military weapons to China for repair, and he put the source in Chinese there. Can you confirm this? And is it of one or of more?
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the Pentagon sends equipment to China for repair. I mean, at this point, so much has been outsourced to China. I know at least at one point the U.S. military uniform was made in China. I don't know if it's still true, but in today's environment, that wouldn't surprise me.
Wow. I got a question from another avid supporter, Truth Seeker. Thank you very much for being here. Question for Carl. Did Scott, he's referring to Scott Ritter about the conversation you had. Did Scott change his narrative about China? He stated as soon as Chinese destroy the U.S. carrier, nukes will start right away to destroy China.
Well, I don't think he necessarily changed his position. I think he just stating a U.S. position. I mean, this is not a secret. This is being openly talked about in different Pentagon think tanks. They have talked about if the U.S. carrier gets sunk in a conflict with China, the U.S. will resort to tactical nuclear weapons. They even talk about nuking the PLA Navy port of Zhanjiang, which is just north of Hainan Island. These things are openly discussed. This is not a secret for people who pay attention to that sort of things. I mean, this might just be some think tanks just throwing crazy stuff out there, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's actual, there's actual contingency plans for that. But this is what they let us know. They let the public know what their plans are. So this is what Scott is referring to. This is not his own position. This is just what some Pentagon planners are kind of throwing out there.
Okay. There's another question from Tamputra. Good to see you, and thank you very much. Please ask Carl to invite, I don't know how to pronounce that one, Carl, for a Taiwanese perspective. I don't know what he's referring to here.
He's talking about Xiang Yu. Xiang Yu is a Taiwanese guy who is currently in Taiwan. He just went back to Taiwan to serve his mandatory service because all Taiwan males between a certain age, they have to do basically a military draft. He was I think he was past the age, so he, instead of doing like a stint in the military, he was basically working as a fireman for like 6 months or no, for a whole year. He was in Taiwan for a whole year, so he knows a lot about Taiwan, and he's and what's different about him is his pro unification. he's very much supporting Taiwan reunify with mainland China.
Well, we'll be happy to have him on the show. And to me, it's not about pro or against. I don't care. As long as person makes the argument that my audience here will benefit from, to learn from. To me, I respect the differences of opinions, as long as they make sense, of course. If somebody starts spewing nonsense, I have to stop it because I just don't tolerate this kind of nonsense. But if they are, because to me, you know what, Carl, I always look at it as a responsibility. The time my viewers are giving me here by coming and watching, you know how many, as I mentioned, and I'm not saying it to be Mr. Nice, that in my personality, they've been asking any comments, when are you bringing Carl? I said, I will. So it's because that's what they expect from me here. So if this person would love to come on the show, why not? We'll do a panel conversation, and we'll address it from the bigger picture, if I may. So, all right, let me see one more question here before I let you, Carl, go. And I am very grateful, by the way, carving out time for me here. So let me see if there's a question. I don't think so. I have any. All right, guys. All right, Carl. Well, I'll give you the final word here. Where do you see things moving forward?
Well, I think the things.
Yeah.
The things will move forward the same it has been for the past decades. I mean, I think U.S. will continue its path of self-destruction. And a lot of the problems the U.S. empire facing today is not even due to China or Russia. It's self-inflicted. But none of the U.S. elite factions are interested into actual fixing the problem. What's interesting about Trump is he's unlike Biden and Obama, who are just basically the candidate for Wall Street and the U.S. deep state. Trump just shows the emperor has no clothes. He is very naked about the U.S. intentions, very nakedly to the shouted to the whole world. So people see what U.S. is really about, rather than all these talks of promoting democracy and human rights. It's going to be a shit show, David. It's going to be a complete shit show in the next few months. We're going to have to see how it all plays out. But I will be here. I'll be here with you, and we'll talk about it.
Yeah, well, for sure. I mean, to me, it's always been about, the leader is a reflection of the country, of the people. That's how I always looks at it. The one who leads is usually reflects. It's the truth, Carl. I know it's a lot of Americans, and most of us will not. They don't think in these terms, but they don't understand that is the leaders reflecting on society, how it is the people of society, because people are who they make a country, and the leader is a reflection of that, and we're seeing where we are. So, Carl, I can't thank you enough, brother. I truly appreciate you carving out time for me here and for my audience. And I look forward to having you next time. And Uyana will talk offline, of course, but we will be talking about who we invite for a panel conversation. Why not? I'd be happy to do that. So once again, thank you, Carl. Truly appreciate you, man. All right, guys, I hope you find it very interesting. Carl is always very interesting to listen to. And yes, I'll be talking with him later on. So we might invite some individual just to do a panel conversation, and I'll put the question for you in the community and get some suggestion, feedbacks, and all that. And I'll check the person if I happen not to know who the person is, and I'll run it also with Carl, because I trust Carl and I always converse with him about all this. Then we'll have a panel conversation. So remember to join me on Monday for the conversation about why China refused, and I use the term refused, to attend the so-called Ukraine Global Summit, which is a farce anyway, by the way. So remember to join me on Monday. As always, remember, geopolitics impact your daily life in more ways than one. Till next time, guys. Bye-bye.